Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of November. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we're going to start with the LPR, with the north of Luhansk People Republic region, or with the east part of Kharkiv region, with this area. Today we have a lot of updates from both sides. If we're talking about the Russians, they were saying that Ukrainians in this area were attacking as usually in two directions. The first attack were in direction of Kuzyomovka, this one, Kuzyomovka, and the second attack was in direction of, in the south, in this area, in direction of Plashanka, this small town. This is the last town between the Ukrainians and the road that connects Kremennoe and Svatovo. The Ukrainians were attacking in direction of Kremennoe, this is the focal point that this town is located right on the road that leads to Rubizhno and Severodonetsk agglomeration. And the Ukrainians were attacking in direction of Stelmakhovka, this one. Kuzyomovka, Stelmakhovka, as you can see, the same area. The Russians were saying that all those attacks were repulsed by them. And also they were talking that the Ukrainians during those attacks on Kupiansk front line direction of Stelmakhovka and Kuzyomovka, and in the south in direction of Plashanka and Kremennoe, the Ukrainians lost around 200 soldiers and something around 20 armored vehicles. If we are talking about the Ukrainians, about the Western sources, they were saying that the Russians made their own counter-offensive operation, and the Russians were attacking in direction of Makeyevka and Nevskaya in these two areas. So as you can see, if we are talking about Kremennoe, there was just attack by the Ukrainians that was repulsed by the Russians. If we are talking about the north part, there was another counter-offensive operation by the Ukrainians in direction of Stelmakhovka and Kuzyomovka. The Russians was on their place, they didn't move. All those attacks were repulsed, but you see that the Russians are saying that they're repulsing these attacks every single day. But the thing is that, for example, if you take a look at this map today, you see that the Russian source map has been updated one more time. You see this green line, this the front line that used to be, let's say, like a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and as you can see, the Ukrainians are pushing, they are not counting their losses, and they force the Russians to step back, because even 2 weeks ago, this small town like Novosovskaya and the entire Kuzyomovka was under Russian control. But as you can see, according to this update, we see that the Russians control just a part of Kuzyomovka and so on. So the Ukrainians, if we are talking about the gaining of the territories, we can say that if we're talking about the facts, that they're pretty successful and they're pushing, because the important thing is that if the Ukrainians are able to take control over Stelmakhovka, Kalamichucha, Krivashevka, Kuzyomovka, there is not a lot of towns in this area, and we know that if we're talking about this area, we know that Ukrainians are using their 14th mechanized brigade in this area, and 92nd Mechanized Brigade in this area, and this is the final towns, the last towns between Svatovo. And if the Ukrainians are able to take Kuzyemovka, this small town, this small fortification, and they're very close to complete this mission, we can say that the battle for Svatovo has started. If we're talking about the Russians, we know that they're trying to prepare the bridgehead to meet the Ukrainians, but anyway, with such attempts, with such progress, I believe that this year maybe we are going to see the battle for Svatovo. I'm not saying that Ukrainians are able or are going to win this battle, but anyway we are going to see this. And of course this is a very big attack and big damage. This battle is going to bring a lot of damage to the Russian reputation, because it's not just this town that the Russians are not planning to give up, but they might be forced to do this. And the most important thing, the most important updates is about this small square located between Nevskaya, Makeyevka, Plashanka, Chervonopopovka, Terny. This small square. As you can see, according to the reports from the Russian source and the Western source, we saw and we see that there was some kind of counter fight on these fields, because And the Russians reported that Ukrainians were attacking in the direction of Plashanka. Yesterday they were attacking in the direction of Chervonopopovka. Today the Western sources reported that the Russians attacked in the direction of Nevska, Makiivka. So that was the battle like on these fields. And this is very interesting, like counter-fight. And so as you can see, the parties need to use some kind of active type of defense, trying to not just to stand up their position as the Russians do on the north or in the south. They need to counterattack. But for now, without any progress for the Russians. As you can see, the map moves, the map updates, and as you can see, not in Russian favor. Now let's go to the south, to the direction of Seversk, Bakhmut area, this direction. The Russians made few attempts of counter-offensive operation in direction of Belogorovka, this area, and in direction of Sporne. These two towns were under Russian attack during the previous hours, but all those attacks were repulsed by the Ukrainians. There is no updates about losses from two sides. So anyway, we know that the Russians are doing something in this area, trying to return control over these territories. If we are talking about Bakhmut, we know that there are very heavy clashes along the town, all along the front line. But for now, we can also say that the Russians stopped, or maybe they were slowed down by the Ukrainians by moving a lot of reinforcement in this area. Or another thing that we can discuss, that the Russians decided to change their focus a little bit from Bakhmut to the south, because I believe that maybe fifth day in a row we are receiving more and more updates from the area that located between New York agglomeration, between Donetsk, New York, this area, and Bakhmut. And I'm talking about small square, small block in Gorlovka by the name of Mayorsk, this one. This is a very important area, and during the previous months the Russians reported at least 2 times. I saw those reports that the Russians managed to penetrate this area and to take control over this. It's a railroad station, as you can see, very big logistics center. There are also residential area. As you can see, there is some residential area a little bit to the northeast from this town, and at least a few times in a row in the past the Russians reported about some success, or even about the fact that they managed to take this town. But those updates were speculation, some kind of speculation, or maybe the Russians were talking about some other areas, streets or districts in this area. So the Western sources are saying that the Russians made few attempts of attack in direction of Mayorsk, but the Western sources are saying that all those attacks were repulsed by the Ukrainians. And if we're talking about the Russians, today we got an update from the head of DPR, Pushilin. He is the head of this republic, and he made some kind of report, notes about the situation. He told us that the Russians managed to achieve some success in this area, and they managed to take, I believe, some few hundreds meters in direction of Mayorsk, and maybe there are clashes in this town. As you can see, the Russians, there is an icon on these trenches, on this fortification, so maybe the Russians are storming this area these days. But if we're talking about this area, this is a very important town, very important block, and let's discuss the importance of this area. This is our New York agglomeration, Donetsk, this is Bakhmut, and this is our Mayorsk. As you can see, both maps shows almost the same picture. This is our railroad station, the block Mayorsk. This is some part of Zaitsev. If you take a look at the Russian source map, there is almost the same. This is the railroad station, Mayorsk, and this is the station. And this is some kind of residential area on the northeast, and the same picture we see here, the northeast, the residential area that, or maybe in the gray zone, or maybe under Ukrainian control. So what is the importance of this area? The importance of this area is that using this road, there are like not much roads. There is one road, as you can see, follow this hand, and there is another road. There is also railroad, and all these roads leads to Atradovka and Kurdyumovka. Sorry, not Atradovka, Azaryanovka. and Kurdyumovka. These two towns, because Otradovka was taken by the Russians a few weeks ago. And if you take a look at this map, you're gonna see that there are not much roads that leads to this area. The Russians, they need to take control over Kurdyumovka, Zryanovka. These areas under protection of 62nd Mechanized Brigade, of 13th Ukrainian Mechanized Brigade, and this is a very powerful fortification area. This area is under very nice protection, defense of the Ukrainians, and they stopped the Russians, the Wagner groups in this area. So the thing that the Russians want to do, as you can see, this Mayorsk and this part of residential area appeared in some kind of back, and furthermore, using this area, the Ukrainians have additional road, extra road to supply and support Kurdyumovka and Radovka from Donetsk, New York agglomeration, from these forces. As we know, this area is pretty calm. There are not much clashes in this area. The Russians are not storming this town. So I believe that Ukrainian forces in this area do have some kind of mobile reserves, mobile groups that they are able to send and use to defend their position in Kurdyumovka and Radovka. Also, the Ukrainians support this area from the north using at least one road that moves from Chasov Yar in this direction. So, and I believe there are a lot of local roads and so on. But the thing is, the most important thing is that there are no normal road that connects Bakhmut with these fortifications. Just the railroad, but I believe that the Ukrainians are not using the railroad stations and the railroad to support this area. So as you can see, there are at least 3 roads. The first one, this one road that moves to this fortification. This is the second that moves from Mayorsk, and this is the third road that the Ukrainians can use to support this area from Chasov Yar. So this is the reason why the Russians are storming Mayorsk. What do they want to do? It's I understand you understand what they want to do. First of all, they want to take control over this area. To color this area in the blue cloud. So, and if the Russians are able to take control over this area, we see that they will be able at least to cut 2 roads. One road that moves to Kurdyumovka, Zryanovka fortification, and the second thing that they are able to do is to cut this road, at least to establish fire control. There are less than 2 kilometers that I believe that the Russians do have possibilities to cut this road. So as you can see, by taking control over this small back, the Russians will be able to reduce the supply and support of Kurdyumovka, Zryanovka fortification at least for 60-70%. And we discussed that this area is under protection of, on the defense of mechanized brigades. There are a lot of mechanized brigades in this area, and that means that they always need to be supplied by fuel, by ammo, by shells for tanks and so on. And this is the reason what the Russians are doing. First, they want to solve the logistic problem and to reduce the combat capabilities of these forces. And after that, they will continue their attack in direction of Kurdyumovka, and the Ukrainians will be forced just to escape and evacuate from this area. And don't forget that we are like in autumn campaign, and it's very difficult to use the fields as the way to transport the vehicles. To tell the truth, the only way how the Ukrainians are able to... of course, they can use fields and so on, but they become a very nice targets for the Russian artillery and so on, because it's very difficult during this period to cross fields because of the fact that vehicles stuck in this area very much. So this about this situation about Mayorsk. So 2 sides are saying totally different updates. So let's see what's going to be next. Now we are moving to the south and we are moving to Donetsk. Let's make a small stop at the Novo-Bakhmutovka Frontline. Today there were no updates about this area. The Russians made few attempts during the previous days, but for now they're stopped. And I believe that these days they are not planning to start everything from the beginning. So for now, I believe that this front line is going to be stable, just the regular artillery duels. Now we are moving to the pesky front line. During the previous weeks, we remember that the Russians managed to achieve some success. The Russians got control over Pesky. The Russians penetrated Ukrainian defense orders in the south of Pervomayska and this area. The Russians got control over some part of Vadiana and so on, but they stopped as well. they stopped as well. For now, it's very difficult for them to do any movement because now they need to reduce the Ukrainian trenches and fortifications and so on. As you know, you see these blocks with trees. Every single block is separated from another with the trees. So you need to understand that every single line, every single block is trenches that prepared by the Ukrainians, as we can see right here. So that's why the Russians need to send a lot of artillery shells to destroy trenches, and after that they're able to storm. So it takes time, and it takes a lot of time. So the Russians need to find a solution how to collapse this front line. And today, at least just the first time in a row, I saw such a thing that the Russians changed the destination and direction of their attack. It's not a strategic change, but some kind of tactical change. First, let's update this map according to the update we have. So the Russians are saying that they control at least something like this. So the south part of Vadiana, that's located on this side of these lakes or river. During the previous hours, days, the Russians were trying to attack in direction of Nivolska, trying to crack all these trenches, these defense orders, and they were trying to clear Vadiana and to establish some kind of fortification, their own positions, and they were trying to storm Oputna from both sides. But for now, the Ukrainians are still there, are still in Oputna, in Vadiana, Nivolska, and are still in Peromaiskaya. And these days, the Russians have changed their destination, and now they're trying to move in direction of, let's say, Peromaiskaya, between these two positions, using these fields. With the infantry, of course, it's just impossible to do with the infantry. They are building trenches. They are trying to move as far as possible, and they're trying to, let's say, establish some kind of fortification trenches on this area, and to cut the support and supply of Vadiana and Peromaiskaya from this corner. So they want to cut these two roads. But to do this, they can do this only with the infantry, because they're always under fire and they can move very slowly, and they're moving very slowly. But this is their destination they're trying to develop. So let's see if they're able to do this. But to tell the truth, if we take a look at this map, it's kind of suicide operation from the Russians, but I believe that they understand better the situation on the ground. So if we take a look at this map, so they're trying to move in this direction. I'm not sure that they will be able to take this corner, but at least I believe that the Russians, because of this forest, they're able to prepare their own trenches in this area. At least they are able to take these forest lines at least until this area, and using these front lines they are able to move or to the north or to the south, but anyway to help their main forces that are storming and clearing Vadiana and Peromaiskaya. So let's see, maybe they're able to do in this area. Now let's move to the South Donetsk area. There were some clashes in this area. The Russians were attacking in direction of Pavlovka, in direction of Prichistovka, in direction of Vadiana. They were storming Novomikhailivka. It wasn't like a fully blooded ground offensive operation. It was some kind of recon combat, maybe trying the luck attack if you are lucky and are able to, let's say, to force the Ukrainians to give up and step back, then you can like take their position or something like this. This information was confirmed also by the Western sources. They are saying that they confirms that there was some kind of attack. Furthermore, the Western sources confirms that the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian orders in Pavlovka, and that they managed to enter even the middle part, the central part of town, and to push the Ukrainians to the suburbs. But later, the Ukrainians managed to move their reinforcement, as we discussed, because of the fact that this town Pavlovka is in the lowland, and it's very easy to control this town from Ugledar. The Russians were forced to step back to the, let's say, to the south part of Pavlovka, and now they're just controlling the safe part. I'm not saying that the Russians are not able to control entire town. We discussed this. They don't want to do this because they will have a lot of losses, because they will be under very strict fire from Ugledar and Ukrainian positions located on that side of the river of the red Kashlygach. Yes, this is the river Kashlygach. So for now, they're stopped. But today we got a very interesting update from the Russians. They published some kind of video. It was at night. During the night period, By the way, during those clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 120 soldiers in this area, from Novomikhailivka to Pavlovka on this arc, and around 7 armored vehicles. And today, furthermore, they lost one helicopter Mi-8. And today, the Russians published video that during the night period, the Ukrainians prepared some kind of convoy, very big convoy. At least if you saw that video, it was a very big convoy. Not less than 10 armored vehicles. It was tanks, trucks, cars, and so on. They built some kind of convoy, and I believe that they were planning to deploy somewhere, to move somewhere. And the Russians, using their Krasnopol artillery shells or maybe some kind of missiles, they attacked this area, and I believe that they reduced the Ukrainians heavily. And that's it about the situation. So as you can see, there are no progress in the ground, just some kind of losses from both sides and mainly from the Ukrainian side. If we're talking about Orekhov-Gulyai-Polye front line, this front line is stable, no changes from the both sides, and so nothing to tell about this area. Now we're moving to Kherson district. Again, the Kherson is the focal point of Ukrainian media sphere. Some sources are saying that the Russians are planning to step back and give up. Some sources are saying that it's a trap. And other sources are saying that these days some United States authorities came to Ukraine and had meeting with the Ukrainian authorities, and they said that the Russians are ready to leave this bank of the river and to leave Kherson to Ukrainians. But if the Ukrainians are ready to sign a peace agreement and to, let's say, to agree that all these territories are from now on is a part of Russian Federation, so it was some kind of like a pocket for negotiations. But the Ukrainians refused, and they told that they will start negotiation process only after the Russians are going to leave the territory of Ukraine, and they will restore the Ukraine in the borders of 1991. If we're talking about battles on the ground, there were some battles there, and there are a very important update from the deployment map. The Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. If we're talking about the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians were trying to develop their bridgehead in this area. They were trying to attack Sablukovka, this small village, and Sukhanova. So they were trying to attack. I believe that they were attacking Sukhanova to pin down the Russians and not to allow them to move their reinforcement. And now the Ukrainians are totally concentrated on this back, and they want to get control over this area and push the Russians from this area. But the Russians are there, they are still fighting, and they're still holding this area. We receive more and more updates that Ukrainians are moving a lot of forces in this area. And today we got some very interesting update from the deployment map.